Hey there, all you Agile limericks that sometimes have racy endings, and welcome to another episode of Agile Bytes, the podcast sponsored by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner day in and day out. Friends, I want to do something a little bit different with you today. Usually I'm ranting about this topic or that topic, talking about things on LinkedIn that have made me angry or commonly misunderstood concepts in Agile that I would like to help you think about more clearly or give you some thoughts on your own practices. But I don't know. I don't know what it was this week. I kind of got a little nostalgic about some things, and I want to do this episode as a bit more of an autobiography. It's not strictly going to be an autobiography. Instead, I want to talk about different aspects of my own Agile journey and different things that I learned in those aspects. And it's my hope that some part of my story may be relatable to you, and you will feel like you have a friend who can empathize with where you're at in your Agile journey, or you will listen to details about my life and treat it as a cautionary warning. And that's acceptable as well. I don't think that's a bad way to go. But I just kind of want to tell you a little bit about how I sort of came up in software development and agility and how different pieces of the journey affected me. And again, I hope that it's useful for you in your own journey. And if nothing else, just know that you're not alone. So early on in my career, I am a self-taught programmer. I taught myself HTML a long time ago, and I'd always liked computers from when I was a kid, and I programmed in BASIC. I would go to the store where they had PCs and would program, 10 print, fill is cool, 20 go to 10. I do all those kinds of things. But I taught myself how to do HTML and make websites, which landed me my first job at a multimedia startup where I instantly then had to learn server-side coding. And back then, the names of the game were things like Classic ASP or PHP. And that was kind of my introduction to programming. And the things that I had to learn on the job, I had to learn such a variety of things. And of course, CSS was emerging as a standard at the time. JavaScript still as big a deal then as it's ever been. And I learned enough to become a technical trainer at an institution here in Kansas City that is now Centric, although it wasn't at the time. I learned a lot more on the job there. That's also where I was exposed to extreme programming, but that's also where I started getting into object-oriented programming because I had to teach it. And I also wanted field experience, so I took some time off to actually get a programming job developing applications in object-oriented languages. And as I was going through this stage of my career, just about every software development project was managed with traditional project management. I know sometimes we talk about waterfall and people say, well, waterfall is not real, it doesn't exist, which I guess, but if you think about a software project being managed like most projects, that's kind of the world we were in. What you did is you did kind of a lot of research, a lot of requirements gathering to estimate out a total timeline and a total cost for the entire project. You would go through a requirements gathering phase that lasted a really long time. You would go through a design phase that lasted a really long time. You would go through a coding phase that lasted a really long time. You would go through a testing phase that we all wished would last for a very long time. But at this point, we had eaten up so much of the project timeline. The testing phase was like 2 days, and then you launched, and then you fixed bugs for the next 5 years. That's kind of how projects happened. And even then, I knew that this was not a good way to go about doing things. I just didn't know how to do it differently. I just all the things that were bad about that were bad. They affected me. They affected other developers. We all, worked the long hours. We all worked a lot of overtime, trying to rush to make deadlines, cutting corners to get stuff out the night before and things like that. Being on call at 3 a.m. for deployment problems, we all kind of went through those things together. And even then, I knew that methodology of tackling software was terrible. I just didn't know that it could be any different. I just sort of assumed that it was part of the job. And yes, I had been exposed to some things from XP, but it was very light exposure. I didn't know what to do with those things. I didn't know how anybody used those things effectively. I just read about some of them. So I just kind of assumed that it was just part of the job. It was just software development just has to be this way. It just has to be late nights and stress and deadlines that get missed and crunch time and hell week and 2-year long projects, 3-year long projects and big estimates up front. And that's just how I thought it had to be. So one of the things that I learned from that point in my life is if you don't know things can be different, you don't know things can be different. And this is why sometimes I have a very almost emotional, a visceral reaction to when people talk to me about software development and they assume something has to be the case. You know, it wasn't very long ago that I got into it with some very intelligent people, very good software developers. They're competitors of ours here in town. And I got into them with it on LinkedIn about releasing bugs into production and how common of a thing that should be. They took the position that releasing bugs into production was a very common thing that everybody did all the time. I took the position that this should be a rarity and you can have releases without bugs in it. Everyone's going to have bugs from time to time, but it should be a rarity for them to get into production. And part of the emotional impetus behind that discussion was just sort of the assumption that this is just realistic. This is just real life. You know, in software development, production releases just have lots of bugs in them. This is just the way it is. And from my early days, that really shaped me. I'm not happy with things being just the way it is. A lot of times there are better ways out there. You just have to find them. You have to discover them, right? Either through experimentation or hearing from other people what they've done. But always be curious about that. You know, if someone tells you something about the way they're doing software and it seems impossible to you, don't start out by saying that's impossible. Ask them how they do it, right? Because it could be that there is a better way out there. You just don't know what it is. And therefore your picture of reality is constrained by what you think is possible. So that was kind of my early life. And then when I was working at KeyBank as an institution kind of went through an agile transformation, and the flavor of choice was Scrum. And at the time, you could become a certified Scrum Master by sitting in 2 days of Scrum training. And that's the end of that sentence. You didn't have to take an exam. You didn't have to have a certain amount of experience. If you sat in the training for 2 days and were minimally responsive, you too could become a certified Scrum Master. I don't think that's the best scheme in the world for certifying people, but hey, look, I mean, everyone does Scrum today. So, you know, it had some impact on the landscape, right? But the thing is the guy at the time taught us how to do Scrum, and he also threw in some of his own personal implementations and did not differentiate between Scrum and the way he liked to do Scrum. But what we didn't know was why. We learned at the time, we called them ceremonies. The Scrum Guide was very different then than it is today. We learned all the things you were supposed to do, but we didn't know why you did them that way. We just knew that you did these things and then agile magic would happen. And let me tell you, we were terrible at Scrum. We didn't know what we were doing. And we would kind of try to help correct each other. And, you know, we would try to do story points and what are these things? And, you know, we would do sprint planning, and sprint planning would take like all day, right? We just didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what good was supposed to look like. And we didn't know the theories behind these practices that we were doing. These days we call that zombie Scrum, where you're just kind of going through the rote motions, but you're not actually achieving the value. That was us, man. I mean, and that was how I cut my teeth in a more formal approach to Agile. So I was a certified Scrum Master, and I was just like maybe some of you, like I knew how to do Scrum, but if you had said, what is the goal of a daily stand-up? I wouldn't have been able to tell you. I just knew that was the Scrum way to do things, right? At some point, working with the different groups in the bank, our group had a Java team talk to us that was doing XP, and they were knocking it out of the park. So again, XP came up again. I was very intrigued by what they were doing, but didn't really have enough time to really know what they were doing, what it looked like, how it was different than what we were doing. So that was sort of my introduction into formal Agile. Now I'm certified, right? I'm a certified Scrum Master. I am Master O the Scrum, and I can tell you what to do. I just can't tell you why, which means I can't tell you how to improve it either at this stage in the game. So, you know, eventually I quit working for KeyBank and, you know, went around to different places. If you're a programmer, you know, your resume probably looks like 5 other people's resumes stitched together. You kind of bounce around wherever you can learn the next thing, wherever you can get more money. And eventually I ended up at a small company called CyberClick Marketing, where I worked under the team of Adam Meteljan and George Westwater, Adam Meteljan being a great manager, good, solid ideas about projects, George Westwater being probably the best architect I've ever worked with in my entire life. And between the two of them, they sort of had come up with their own stuff. They came up with their own system of attacking software development projects, and they would modify it as they learned and as they went. They would try new things. And I thought this was so cool. You know, they weren't using Scrum, they weren't using Kanban, they weren't using anything that you read about in a book. It was just they had taken some different ideas, they had fashioned them into a way they thought could work, they would try them out, and then they would change things based on what worked and what didn't work. And those guys were being agile, right? That was very formative in my ideas of what agile teams actually looked like. Were we doing everything as well as we could have? Probably not. But that whole process of let's come up with stuff that we think will work for us, try it and change it. And we're not really worried about whether we're doing Scrum or whether we're doing Kanban or XP or any of this other stuff. It's let's just take good ideas, put them to work and see if they help or not. Let's define what outcomes we're looking for and see if they move us closer. So from these gentlemen, I learned that you can come up with your own stuff, that you can just experiment with the things that work for you, that you can increase your agility through these experiments. So it's not about quote unquote doing agile or doing an agile framework right, like Scrum. It's about knowing what outcomes you're looking for, putting together the things that you think will give you those outcomes, experimenting, measuring, and changing, adapting on the basis of what you see in order to make things better for everybody. It was great, you know, and even though today I don't do things the same way we did them back at CyberClick Marketing, that sort of meta methodology left a strong impression on me. And to this day, when I approach my agile coaching engagements, that shaped how I approach those engagements, because I don't show up ready to tell you how to do Scrum, and I don't show up ready to tell you how to do Kanban. I show up wanting to know, what do you want to get out of agility? Why do you care? What are the main outcomes you're looking for? Because the experiments that we run are all going to be oriented around that. And things that have worked for me are not necessarily going to work for you, at least in an unchanged format, right? So it's going to be that process of putting together things that we think will lead us closer to the outcomes we're hoping for from agility or from a more lean operations, running the experiments that we think will help us out and get us there and seeing if they do and changing accordingly, not really worried about whether we are being orthodox, right? Not really worried about whether we're doing true Scrum or true Kanban or true XP or what have you. When I left CyberClick, it was actually to go work at a consulting company. I decided, wouldn't it be cool to have a new job every year without actually changing companies? That might be interesting to try for a while. So I got a job with a consulting company. It's where I met my current business partner, Travis Dietz. He worked for that company as well. And it was there that I worked with a man named Troy Tuttle here in town. And Troy was big on Kanban, and I didn't know anything about Kanban at the time. And working with him, seeing how he did things, seeing how some of the other consultants at Adventure Tech did things and worked with these principles, I really learned a lot. I learned a lot about Kanban for sure, but there was a reason that Kanban seemed to work so much better for me and the teams I was on and the clients I worked with than something like Scrum did. Now, you might say, well, maybe you really didn't understand Scrum to begin with. And for a while, you might have had a point. But here's the thing. What I discovered is that most of the problems that plague software development teams are problems that are addressed more by being lean than by being agile. In other words, most teams, their big problems, the ones that cause them pain on a daily basis, are not we can't adapt fast enough to changing market conditions. That is a thing for sure. I'm not saying that's not a problem. I'm not saying that isn't a big issue. I'm not even saying it's not as big as the lean side of things. It is big. If you're not building the right things, if you're not delivering value, then I don't care how efficient you are. So please don't hear me wrong. But what I am saying is when you're talking to your software development teams and the things that bother them, a lot of those problems are more readily solved with more lean, flow-based, efficient operations than they are things that increase your responsiveness to changing demands. You need both, I think. Everybody needs some combination of both. but not every team is feeling the same pain from both of those at any given time. And I found that a lot of places I went, as soon as we started doing Kanban in some form or fashion, all of a sudden we became a lot more predictable and we could communicate a lot better with the business about what they could expect from us. And we became a lot better about prioritization, and we became more collaborative as developers swarmed on the different items. And can you do those things with Scrum? Yeah, probably, but Kanban was just a straight shot to get us there. So my main learning from Troy and the others that I worked with at Adventure Tech and the clients that I worked with during that period in my development was not so much Kanban is great, we should all be doing Kanban. It's just, it began to open my eyes to the fact that being agile and being efficient or being lean are not the same thing, and they address different issues. And this all comes back to outcomes, right? When your boss says we need to be agile, what do they mean? Do they mean we need to be more efficient? Do they mean we need to be faster? We need to develop more? We need to develop better quality? Do they mean we need to collaborate more? What is it that they mean? So being agile and being lean are not the same thing. And when you are looking at a particular software development operation and you are thinking about the outcomes that you need to address most readily, Scrum may not be the answer, right? Or even becoming more agile may not even be the answer. Maybe you need to become more lean. Maybe you need to become more efficient. Again, like I said, in most places, it's a combination. It's some of both to different extents, but it raised my awareness of that issue. And as I became more familiar with the way lean and flow-based operations worked, it also helped me understand Scrum a lot better and why Scrum exists and what all the technology in Scrum is supposed to be doing and the value of those things and what those things bring to you. So by being more exposed to Kanban and really learning Kanban inside and out, it just helped me understand the whole Agile enterprise and the way it interacts with Lean a lot better. Well, at this point in my career, I am kicking butt. I am a great software developer. My teams are running great. I am helping clients in a lot of the same ways that I've been helped. And I feel like I'm at the top of my game, right? I am a Kanban expert. And I can make any other team Kanban experts just by wanting to, right? And it was around this time then that I ran into a man named Dan Vacani. And Dan was doing a 2-day workshop on metrics. And I went to that workshop, and one of the things that I remembered most from that workshop is he was talking about cumulative flow diagrams, and he would show us a series of different teams' cumulative flow diagrams, ask us what we thought the diagrams reflected, and then he would tell us what was really going on with that team. So it was kind of cool. Like we were almost like doctors, right? We're looking at symptoms. This patient has these symptoms. What do you think's going on, right? And it was kind of like an episode of House MD. And if you've met Dan Vacani, you know he's kind of a jerk like House is. So it's really cool. You get the full immersive experience. Dan and I are friends, by the way. But I learned a lot about flow metrics from Dan, which then led into Monte Carlo simulations and how to use those. And that flow metrics and flow metric tooling changed a lot of how I manage projects. And so it was from Dan that I learned that no matter how experienced you are, no matter how good you are, you can always learn something. You can always get better. Somebody is doing something that will help you out. Somebody is doing something that you could learn from. And even if you don't do exactly what they do, it can change your practice for the better. I've been in software development for well over 20 years. So yes, I started when I was 3. And I've been kind of doing the lean agile coaching thing for 10 to 15, depending on when you think I really had the knowledge to legitimately start doing that. And every time I think I know it all, right? Like I can get a team running at high performance almost these days with like a snap of my fingers, right? And then somebody comes along that really challenges my thinking. And, oh, that thing that I thought I was right about, maybe I'm wrong about. Or, oh, I thought I knew everything about this, but this person actually understands it at a level differently than I do. If you've interacted with me much, this may come as a shock to you, but deep down, I'm actually pretty humble about what I know about agility and lean, because I always know that there's somebody out there who's run experiments I haven't run and who is doing something that I haven't done and has discovered some truth or some technique or some practice or some principle that would really change the way that I might do a thing or think about a thing. So thank you for that, Dan. And if you think about it, really, the beginning and the end kind of brings us full circle, because it all comes back to, if you don't know that it can be different, then you don't know it can be different. And that needs to come from the outside a lot of times. Somebody needs to show you that things can be different. So what do I want to leave you with today? Well, I hope that something along that journey resonated with you. Maybe you can learn something from my mistakes. Maybe it just helps to know there's somebody out there who is going through the same things that you did. But one thing that I would probably leave you with, and this is where I am today, is to not be so committed to where you're at that you can't leave it behind for something better. And I don't think that's something you should necessarily apply to every aspect of life, but when it comes to your Agile practice, it definitely applies. Someday I'm going to find something that works better for me than Kanban. And when that day comes, I'm going to be all about whatever that other thing is. Someday I'm going to find something that works better for me than Monte Carlo simulations. And when that day comes, then I'm going to drop those simulations for whatever the next thing is. This is an evolving field. Thought is evolving. Software is evolving. The market is evolving. Everything is evolving. And our methodologies are going to evolve along with it. So wherever you're at today, or even if you're coming into this for the first time, there's always something new to learn, and you should never be so dogmatically committed to what you're doing today that you can't leave it behind for something better. Always, always, always be continuously improving, even if you've been at this for 15 years. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment, because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.